Howdy, friends. Laura Copley here, editor of The Banner. I am so happy that you have joined our magazine's podcast. The pilot season revolves around the decisions, people, and impact of Synod 2026. Just like our Banner commentary column, the views you hear may not necessarily reflect the views of the Banner or the CRC Church, and that's okay. Our goal is to explore. A big thanks to Pastor Derek and Sarah. They recorded all episodes in the hours directly following Synod, catching folks just before they headed home. These conversations are fresh, candid, and really interesting. But enough for me. Let's get to it.
Once upon a time, there was a Christian Reformed church in the suburbs of Chicago, in a suburb called Planefield. Derek, can you tell us the story of this church?
Yep. It was a congregation like so many that, by God's grace, was growing rapidly in the 90s and the early 2000s. There was this inflection point where there was a split in the congregation in about 2008. And from 2008 to 2020, the church went from about 550 members to about 45. Ooh. They were thinking about closing, but before they thought about closing and selling off the building, they approached Orland Park CRC and we began conversations about what it would look like for us to partner in the work of revitalization and renewal in Planefield.
And it worked. What you guys did worked so well that 2 years ago, your classis, which is Chicago South, asked Synod for a task force to study multi-site, which you ended up chairing that committee. And this year, your report was fully adopted by Synod. In fact, they liked it so much that they took the unusual step of putting your suggested pathway to multi-site in the church order, the official church order.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. And the church order supplement, so it doesn't even need to be ratified by future Synod.
Even faster. Let's talk about that. I am Sarah Zylstra, a writer for the Gospel Coalition and an active member of New City Church, which is a Christian Reformed congregation in Kansas City, Missouri. I'm here with Derek Buikema, pastor of Orland Park Christian Reformed Church, and we are normally both the hosts of the Banner podcast. But today, Derek is going to be the guest, and I am going to be the host because I would like to ask him some questions about this. So, Derek, did you know that in 1990, there were 10 multi-site churches in the United States, and by 2014, so we're talking 24 years later, there were 8,000 multi-site churches in the United States?
I did not know that.
So a lot of churches began reaching for this model, the same model that you reached for, around the same time. And I'm wondering if you can tell me what makes this model attractive? Like, why are people reaching for this as a solution?
I think that the reason that it's attractive is intentional fellowship. Intentional fellowship is the thing I think is what makes this work. It's essentially our Christian Reformed Church model is grounded in covenant. When we met with Ken Benjamins, who was talking about discipline, he talked about how our whole church order flows from this covenantal notion about what it means for us to live together. Multi-site, I think, recognizes that and puts that into the foundational working relationship of how churches are going to relate to each other. Even our covenantal unity within the Christian Reformed Church, it can be pretty broad, and it may be that people don't make use of that to great effect, especially within the classes. And multi-site sort of ratchets up the level of connection that two congregations or sometimes two campuses are going to engage in. Now, there's a wide variety of different multi-site arrangements, and we laid those out in our report. Maybe the most closely related would be the church that has two worship services. You know, a church has two morning worship services. In a lot of ways, that's a multi-site congregation. Those are so much so that some of our Nine Marks friends would say that that's not actually a faithful expression of church because you should only have one morning worship service. But it is a reality that sometimes people will be at Orland Park CRC, which has two morning services where I serve, and they'll have gone to the 8:30 service for 10 years, and they will have never met somebody that goes to the 10:45 service just because they are at different expressions of the same congregation. That would be one level of a multi-site church, which is the same church and represented by the same council, chosen by the same congregation. Now, you can have like little broader expressions of that. Some would say that sometimes a church gets so big that you have an overflow room. And so people are watching at a screen in the youth center or something like that rather than in the main sanctuary. That would be another multi-site expression. Then sometimes it can grow a little bit bigger and you have two congregations that maybe share the same branding and same liturgy that are in two different places. And then you can go a little bit broader and say, all right, we have two churches or a group of churches that have the same core mission, and we've covenanted together around that. And we will share this mission intentionally together and meet regularly together, even though our worship services and our preaching and our liturgy might be different. But this core missional reality is so core to who we are that we consider ourselves still a part of this multi-site arrangement. So you can see at each level of distance, it gets a little looser. Now, the classic multi-site, which is what we were talking about, is a church that might share a governing council, two campuses that might share a governing council. And we wanted to explore the best way to make those sorts of realities work in a reformed way. And the thing especially that we wanted to guard against, and this is one of the things that was asked, I'm thankful for on the floor, was we wanted to guard against a model where there's this centralized leader and centralized board, and there are a bunch of screens maybe around the city or around the world that just have this one preacher on that screen. We thought that there's this reformed instinct that comes in all of our confessional documents that key to being a church are these local expressions of the ministry of the word and the ministry of the sacraments. And so we don't want to abstract the ministry of the word or ministry of the sacraments from any localized body. And that's sort of the heartbeat of how we would want to do multi-site. We recognize that there are ways that you can share resources across those churches and maybe even share like an administrative council that helps operate both of those physical plants and ensure that both churches are still operating within the same schema. But it would be a multi-site church that then does the work of trying to raise up local disciples, a local preacher, local administration of the sacraments that's not dependent on this one leader in this distant realm. Does that make sense? Am I sort of getting at that?
Yeah, that does make sense. And so I think you can see pragmatically speaking, and I know we want to think theologically, but pragmatically speaking, there are some big benefits to that, right? There's some, you can consolidate some of the office costs. Mm-hmm. You can, just like you could with a denomination or any gathering of churches, you'd be able to better support, like pool your resources to support ministries or missions or have events together or think about your local area more holistically maybe. So you can see some practical aspects that would make a lot of sense.
I think that it really works as we think about revitalization, or it can really work. It's not like our models guarantee certain results. We trust God working in His providential way by the Holy Spirit. But one of the benefits can be if a church is in decline and has been in decline for a long time, they start to lack the resources to call a minister. Mm-hmm. Or because they've been in decline for a really long period of time, they lack the confidence to call a minister. Sometimes they might have the financial resources built up over a long period of time, but it's sort of like, we're fearful that nobody really wants to come here. And very often it's hard for a preacher to go to a place that feels like it's despairing. Mm-hmm. And so one of the benefits is that as Christ Community Church of Planefield came under the authority of the Orland Park CRC Council, and Orland was the church that was then extending the call to the pastor, Kaylee Meza, for him to come and pastor this campus. Kaylee's told us, I would not have accepted a call from Christ Community Church in Planefield. I was willing to accept a call from Orland Park Christian Reformed Church to serve Planefield because I felt like I was attaching myself to a broader system of accountability and support that I wouldn't have had if I had just gone to this church were it on its own. And so I think that has been a really big benefit, I pray, to Kaylee and to Planefield, and I think that's part of what, Orland can do very few things in that space for them. But what we can do is to provide the stability that it's like, all right, we have a process wherein this salary is going to get paid. So don't worry about that. Just worry about preaching the gospel and reaching the community, administering the sacraments, doing your pastoral visitation. Don't worry about, oh no, we don't have enough to actually make this work. We can take that off your plate for a period of 5 years as you work towards stability. The other thing that we could do is put Kaylee in a system wherein he and I would meet our associate pastor at Orland, Peter Voss, where we could meet each week and where we could break down texts and help each other see parts of the text that we wouldn't have, either of us or any of us, seen on our own, and help do our work faster as a preacher because of that. And the other thing that we can do is we can meet and we can pray for each other and we can share the ministry burdens. And all of that is facilitated by this multi-site arrangement that we have working. And it's been really fruitful. And I would love to talk about ways that it's been fruitful if you want to hear it. But I also don't want to talk too much. You tell me where you want to go.
No, well, the trouble is I would want to go, we have to limit ourselves somewhat to time, but, and I do have so many questions. I'm going to ask you this. So he's under the authority of your council?
Correct.
So is there value, though, of being under the authority of your own local body's council?
So it's a both and for us.
Okay.
So he was called by Orland Park CRC, but then one of the things that we did as they became an emerging church, which is a status in our church order that allows that church to come under the authority of our council, is we raised up local elders and deacons. So those are the ones that he is like responsible to week in and week out. And then they sort of report to a broader administrative council that then oversees the whole thing. But accountability for how sacraments and worship are carried out is done locally for Kaylee. And then I'm the lead pastor of Orland Park CRC, and so I have to do reviews of all the other pastors. So my review of Kaylee then arises out of conversation with his elders and his deacons, rather than our elders about how they perceive Kaylee is going to be doing. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Is this a long-term, like sometimes people will do a multi-site. I remember Tim Keller talking about doing multi-site with his, but the goal of like, could we spin these off? Eventually he would want to just spin them off into their own local churches. There's probably pros and cons to to eventually spinning off or staying together. How do you guys think about that?
We agreed at the start of this relationship that we were going to reevaluate after 5 years to determine if this was a healthy and beneficial reality for Planefield CRC. And that if it was, that they would have the opportunity to continue in this connection with Orland Park CRC. And if it wasn't, if it felt unhelpful or oppressive in any sort of way, that they would walk their own way at that point. And so we have yet to hit that 5-year point, but we're a year away from it. And my sense in talking to Planefield CRC is that they're going to want to continue in all of this. And they're going to want a pathway by which they can become an organized congregation. So a congregation that's healthy and strong enough to become organized in our church order, but still allowed to remain in a multi-site arrangement that's no longer a relationship of dependency. It's a relationship of mutually walking together. And the way that works in our structure is that Planefield CRC has a totally different liturgical style than Orland Park CRC does. They do weekly communion. We don't do weekly communion at Orland Park CRC. They're intentionally more liturgical than Orland Park CRC is. But we do preach on the same text week in and week out. We don't preach the same sermon, but Kaylee and I will work together through Charles Simeon Trust worksheets to break down the structure and the context and the meaning of the passage, talk about how we're going to connect it to Christ. We'll come out of there with points of application and a sermon title usually. And then Kaylee will write it for the Planefield congregation. I'll write my sermon for the Orland congregation. But we've helped each other make progress together throughout the week. And that's been fruitful and helpful and life-giving. And I hope we continue that relationship, even as the church really reaches this place where there's stability enough for them to be an organized congregation.
I mean, I think that also just makes it sound like it would be more fun. Your ministry, especially being a pastor, can be a very lonely thing. And so that to walk with somebody else sounds like it would be a lot of fun.
Absolutely.
So I've got another question for you. Synod just set this goal that it's going to also wants to plant loads and loads of churches. If you are in a larger, stable, healthy church and you're thinking, I would like to plant a church, or maybe I'd like to do a multi-site to help revitalize the church, how do you think through where to use your resources or what is needed? Because you're going to need to use the same young, eager guys to plant your church as you would to do your multi-site on to revitalize.
I think it's going to depend congregation to congregation in terms of what's best. Some church planters are going to every relationship is going to start basically as a multi-site. That's the way that it's going to have to start, I think. Wherein a church is sent with a core group that's not strong enough to exist on its own quite yet. It's a plant, right? It's a small sprout. And so there's going to have to be that relationship of accountability with the planting congregation. And I think that that's necessary and life-giving and vital and important. And I think that it's going to be important to have a lot of clarity about, all right, so are we intending for them within a handful of years to become totally independent and formally detached from us? Or is it helpful for us to be like, hey, let's keep the door open to this indefinite period of mutual support and accountability that exists within our system and within our structure? I think that if there's clarity about all of that, it may help the work of planting, because maybe this is simplistic. I'm simplifying things, so it's probably not this simple. But I get the sense that some people at Orland, when we've thought about church planting, they're like, but we don't want to say goodbye to our members. We don't want to just send them away. But if there's this notion, oh, they're still a part of us, they're like, oh, we just have members in more places now. Now, ultimately, that's the same when you plant a church, right? Because we're a part of the body of Christ. We just have members in other places. But for some reason, there's this emotional connection to these folks. And if you feel like, oh, we still are a part of the same thing, then people, at least in my context, feel freer to be like, go, because you're still with us and we still can rejoice in all that. And it's not a competing church. It's us.
Yeah.
Just in a different place. So there's that opportunity.
Yeah,
I think.
that's really interesting. I think you're right, though. There's a psychological component to all of that as well. So if you're in a smaller church, that we have 146 currently in the CRC that don't have a pastor. And I'm not saying all of them are struggling, because maybe they're just currently looking for another pastor. They could be totally fine.
Yep.
But some of them are, especially I've come from Iowa, and especially in some of those rural areas, those churches, as the economy changed, those churches are small and struggling. How do you know when it is time to look around and think through, should we reach out to another church around us to see if we can be multi-site with them? And then would you say, look within this many number of miles, or how close do you have to be aligned theologically?
Yeah. I think miles are fungible. I think theological alignment is not.
Okay.
I think that you have to have fundamental theological alignment in order to do this effectively. And there are ways that churches within the CRC disagree with each other. And I think that if you have pretty fundamental disagreements, maybe on like the nature of worship or on the nature of ordination, it's going to be really difficult to do this together. There may be ways to figure it out that I'm unaware of. But I do think that for this to work, you're going to have really, really tight theological alignment in any site. And if you don't, that's fine within our Christian Reformed structure and system. But if you're going to do this multi-site thing, it's going to be really, really hard if you are always litigating differences that you experience from group to group. I don't see how that would be possible, or I don't think it would be wise, because you might give yourself to overmuch fighting as you lobby each other to change in this or that way. But I think that miles are fungible. Ideally, it'd be nice if there's a congregation. Well, two things. One is, ideally, it's close enough that if they become a part of this multi-site arrangement with another congregation, maybe an initial relationship of dependence that could move to this relationship of co-laboring. Initially, it'd be nice if the church that is not dependent is able to send a handful of people, because maybe the church that remains is down to 20, 30, 40 people. And it may be that the church that has some, that's stable has 20, 30, 40 people to be able to give. And all of a sudden that becomes really a massive shot in the arm and an initial move to push towards viability. So that would be helpful. And that's usually possible if the church is within 15, 20 minutes of driving. Once you get beyond that, it becomes increasingly difficult to do that. And then the other consideration is this congregation close enough to be able to have a pastor that could at least drive in and meet somewhere so that the pastors could work together and hammer out texts in person together. And if not, it's probably not going to work for a multi-site arrangement. But if so, it might be worth trying.
Yeah.
So Planefield is further away than I would like for a multi-site arrangement. So far away that we couldn't send basically anybody. There's one couple that left from Orland to go to Planefield, and so that's the one couple that we could
lived close enough to both. Yeah.
But that's not very much.
Yeah.
Really, what we could provide were the resources and the stable structure, which ended up being fruitful. And by God's grace, this congregation has gone from 45 when we enfolded them. A bunch of people left because they didn't like the changes, which is understandable. So they dropped down to 30 or 25. And now they're worshiping about 100 every Lord's Day. And they are stable and they have sufficient sort of giving from the congregation to be able to support a pastor. And we're praying that that number will just continue. They just had a new members class that was announced. They had 5 families join that new members class. So they're going to welcome 5 families, Lord willing, in the next couple of months. It's great. It's just great.
They're doing great. So I do, before everybody runs out and starts their own multi-site church, we do want to offer some cautions.
That's right.
Because we know, there were very few, and then there was a big boom of multi-site churches. And then not all of them were done wisely. And some of them, I think we've talked about this at some point today, where you just have the pastor personality and it's all built around one person, even if that person doesn't want it to be built around them, right? I'm thinking about Tim Keller, and it would be like, people are just going to come and see you, even if you wish they didn't all want to come and see you. So maybe you're just all watching on screens somewhere, or maybe, there's ways that can be done in an unhealthy manner. And so I know that your report tried to put up a lot of guardrails to protect against that. Can you talk a little bit about the guardrails?
We wanted to make sure that any church planting arrangement is agreed upon by the classis before either party is allowed to work to move into it. We wanted this to be done in the light of day so that the classes are aware of all of this, so that the broader group of churches could be like, careful about this or that or the other thing. And maybe that careful thing is like, you're about to give your church building to another church. Like, are you willing? Do you really want to do that? Or if you do, what are the parameters or what's the structure? What do we kind of hold up around all that? That's the first thing. The other is like, make it really clear how the elders and deacons of one campus relate to the elders and deacons of another. Make sure that there's not a potential for lording it over, for it to become about one person's platform rather than the growth of the church in general. And so there are a whole host of things in the appendix that we put together, which again, the advisory committee liked and said, let's put that into the church order supplement to make sure that all along the way, the classes is like, hey, in about, I think, 7 different areas related to governance, from governance to finance, how is it that you're going to relate together? So there's a lot of clarity as you walk into this relationship, because otherwise things could change really aggressively in ways that maybe the dependent congregation didn't expect. So we wanted that to be totally clear. We also wanted to make sure that some of our principles of church government don't become subservient to this multi-site structure, which operates in a lot of non-denominational sort of contexts that operate with an ecclesiology that we just don't share. Mm-hmm. And so again, the localism in terms of what it is that we expect is one of those guardrails. The fact that the preaching and the sacraments are going to be overseen by local elders, and the ministry of mercy is going to be done by local deacons, and that discipline is going to be done by local elders rather than by some distant board that would do discipline by fiat, right? Or by email. The localism is really key to all of this as part of those guardrails to prevent against some of those abuses. Now, there are going to be ways that people misuse any system, and we pray that God preserves multi-site churches in the Christian Reformed Church from those sorts of realities. But there are abuses in our system as it is right now, as we relate and have related to each other. And so what we're trying to do is to recognize the big ways that multi-site churches have maybe fallen into mistakes, and to be like, at the front end and all throughout, make sure that there's the clarity at the front end and accountability on the part of the classes all throughout to make sure that these sorts of things can't readily or easily happen within Christian Reformed multi-site systems.
Can you talk a little bit about the difference of what you're doing in Planefield and the difference of what you're doing I know Chicago South is planting, so you're going to have a church planter come and resident with you for a couple of years.
That's right.
So how will that look similar and different from what you did with Kaylee?
The reality is that it will involve that church will involve us sending out a core team from which this new congregation grows. Now, the relationship of that group that we send out, because we're planning on that church planter being with us for 3 years, it's going to depend on what they feel is going to be the most healthy and helpful to them. It will at least start out in the same kind of arrangement that we have with Planefield, wherein we will all get together, work through the text, and we'll all have the same text that we preach through at the beginning. But it may be that they're like, yeah, but we intend to be in this place where we're not all preaching the same text. And that's okay. We don't feel like we need to have that level of ownership. But I do think that the partnership that we share is life-giving enough to at least strongly consider that that's going to be the pathway going forward. Because it just is really great to walk together and to work together and to make each other laugh and to make fun of each other and hold each other accountable and pray for each other in a way that is sort of like covenantally agreed upon. There's beauty and joy in that kind of partnership.
I love that. Do you think there are just ways that classist pastors could walk closely with each other like that?
There are. And in Classes Chicago South, we're doing that. So we're trying to get together once a month-ish, a little less frequently during the summer. And we're doing something called the Chicago Company of Pastors, where we read a different work of theology or one time we read How to Know a Person by David Brooks, right? Good books that will help us with an aspect of what it means to be a pastor and what it means to be a pastor theologian. And then we discuss those as a group. Now, that group is more voluntarily associated. We're not covenantally bound. If somebody doesn't show up, it's like, oh, well, something came up. If somebody doesn't show up at our sermon planning meetings, it's like, there better be a reason, right? Like, we've agreed to do this together.
Yeah.
Where in the Chicago Company of Pastors is this voluntary association that we share. And I think that we have deep affection for each other. So that's been really great and life-giving itself. But it's not the same level of expectation. And it would be hard for it to be. Yeah. I don't think it would be possible for it to be because we're not multi-site churches. We're relating to each other in a different sort of way. But I do think that there are ways that classes can press into life together, and I think that they should. And I think that the more that we can be in the same room as each other, the more strength we will have to be able to do our work together, especially because when we then discuss things on the floor of classes, it's not like it's been 6 months since we last saw this person. We're like, oh, we just shared a meal together and shared prayer requests, or he just made fun of me at our last Company of Pastors meeting, and so I totally know where he's coming from with all this, and it makes the deliberations more fruitful and helpful. And there's just a shared trust that we have because we know each other much better.
Yeah, I love that. My last question for you is, can you talk about the fruitfulness? Like, why should, on both ends, why? I can see how there would be hesitancy because this is going to cost money and it's going to cost energy. It costs you time, right? And so why is it worth it to want to do this?
Well, I think that, I don't want this to sound trite because I don't intend it to be, but I know that it could be taken that way. I mean, the gospel is worth this. We had an opportunity in Orland where we saw a congregation that we're like, well, it may be that there's this, I'll state it positively, there is this amazing opportunity for a reformed gospel witness in Planefield in a church building that already exists, but with a group of people that have been having a hard time that we want to be able to support. It will take a lot of money from Orland Park CRCNA. It will take a lot of energy and attention from various leaders within the congregation, but the witness of the gospel is worth it. And it's worth making that our first priority in terms of what we're chasing after, what we're running after. And so when we at Orland get news that a couple months ago, a whole family is baptized that has never been in church, like the father had been baptized as a child and was like culturally Catholic for 8 years of his life or something like that. No one else in the family had ever stepped foot in a church. And to see that then the father, already having been baptized, wasn't, but the rest of the family's all baptized. They're all welcomed into fellowship, having been led to trust in the Lord Jesus by a pastor that has shown himself to be an effective evangelist, by a congregation that has demonstrated itself to be really hospitable and welcoming. And to see people then pass from death to life, why wouldn't you give up time, resources, energy to make that happen?
Yeah, that's really good. You would give up everything. That's great. Thank you so much for being on this podcast today, Derek. And thank you so much for watching. We really appreciate the time that you spent with us today. The Lord bless you and keep you.